This is the UARKFCA Timeout, the podcast where coaches and athletes share what God has done and is continuing to do in their lives. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Today I've got Jezreel Bachert, I call him JB, in the studio today, running back on the Arkansas Razorback football team and Army ROTC cadet, and we're going to get into both of those things here in a little bit, man. Welcome to the studio.
Hey, glad to be here.
Man, so good. I know we've gotten to know each other pretty well over the last couple of years, but, you know, your story, you got a great story. Let's just start there, man. What's your story?
So you want to hear a little bit about my testimony?
That would be the preferred route. And then really, if there's anything else that you just think, I mean, first Army ROTC guy we've had in the studio. So if you got some cool stories there, you know, I mean, I'm not gonna tell you we don't want to hear them.
Oh, I've got some good ones. Yeah,
good, man.
Well, I guess I can take you back to basically when I really got into my faith. I'd say it started way back in high school. Around my freshman year, I had things going on like really well for me. I actually played quarterback at the time. Could really sling it. Mm-hmm. You know, everything was going great. And, you know, I was like, hey, I was involved in church, you know, good Christian guy, and trying to make impact. But it was always kind of about, you know, the sport. But around that time, I ended up getting injuries. Had a back injury that took me out for a full year. I could barely walk. There were some days that I literally missed school for weeks. Didn't know, a lot of questions. I was like, hey, what's going on? I was in the training room a lot. And I was like kind of questioning my faith a little bit in a ways. I'm like, man, I just knew who I was as Jezreel the athlete, but not Jezreel the person. Same thing coming into my sophomore year. Just got back, tried to start throwing, had a shoulder injury, out for another year. And I was like, man. But the good thing from that is I learned who I was as a person. So I got to, you know, build my relationship with God, got to build my relationship with the people around me. I mean, my family, my friends, my coaches, a couple select coaches, really had a role in helping me, you know, build in my faith. And I was able to talk with God and find out more about who I was as a person versus who I was an athlete. And ultimately, my testimony kind of leads to me to coming here. And shoot, even just getting on this podcast, none of this would have been possible without him. I've always been a big believer in following your faith. And I just kept on knocking on doors, and he just kept on opening and closing certain ones. But yeah, to bring you to college, I had no idea I was going to end up here.
Now you say that because you're not from Arkansas.
That's right. I'm from Texas.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, so I got to finish my senior year. Didn't know what I was wanting to do. Still got to go out there for football year, had a great season and everything. Played basketball, killed it. But then I got about midway through my senior year, and I was like, man, you know I've been great enough. I could have probably got scholarship to go do something with athletics, but didn't know what that path was going to look like. Well, then I started looking into, I was like, well, I've always been passionate about my country. You know, I've always wanted to serve. Do things for others, and you know I just love that, you know, how great this country is, and go out there and defend its freedom. And ultimately, eventually got in touch with a colonel. His name is Colonel Frank. Heck of a guy, heck of a leader. And through that process, found out, hey, you know, you don't have to go to West Point Air Force Academy, Naval Academy to go play football and, you know, go to school and go in the Army and play football. But it was really cool because I found out, hey, you know, I could go be a part of a championship environment while also being able to do the Army. So, you know, I graduated, and I knew it was like, okay, it's a long shot to, you know, be a walk-on as a football player, but I always believed I could belong, and I just felt like God was calling me for something bigger. You know, I could have took the safe road. I actually had a offer to Central Arkansas, a preferred walk-on, and I could have played, and they wanted me to play tight end. But I was like, hey, if I'm going to go take a shot, let me go, you know, where I feel like I've been called to go to be. And that's how I ended up at Arkansas. And then so the first year I got here, got plugged into the Army side of things. And, I mean, I just kept on knocking on doors. I mean, never would have thought I would end up here. And God led me here. And that just shows how great of an impact he's had on my road getting here. But, yeah, I showed up here in Arkansas and found out, hey, tryouts were until the springtime. And All right, so I was like, well, what's the closest thing I could do to playing football? Well, there's a rugby team. Never played in my life. I actually connected to the guy through email. That's how, out of technology he was. Guy from South Africa that coaches here. He's been doing it for 20 years. Pretty cool. Got to go do that. Got to have that experience. And, looking back, I'm like, there's no way without God that, I would have ever had that type of experience. But while I was doing that, I was also in the Army. I was getting to go do trainings, flying on helicopters, going out and doing sticks lanes. I was actually on this Ranger Challenge team. We shot guns. We did obstacle courses. Did multiple miles of rucks. And, those things are 35-plus pounds, whatever you got, your gun, everything, and doing all that. And here's the coolest story, I think, how you were asking earlier. What's the coolest story? Coolest thing I've gotten to do since being here was I was playing a rugby. I was at a training with the Army out at Fort Chaffee, and we rode the helicopters, and it was my first time. Recommend it for everybody. But we got off the bird, and I knew I wasn't going to make my game that day, but my colonel came to me, and this tells you the kind of character and the kind of person that God put in my life. He was like, "You want to make your rugby game still?" And so I literally got off the bird, got to go play my game against Kansas University, and I got to go compete all in the same day.
Wow.
Never was foreseeing that, if I would have had your typical route of going that way. Then, long story short, came around springtime. I've been training, trusting that process. I had that belief, God just tells you, to trust in Him with all your heart. And I just always held in that Bible verse, Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans not to harm you, but to give you a hope and a future. That's my key thing, and hopefully, for whoever's listening to this, that they'll take away from that. It is true. You keep knocking on those doors, He will provide. And so I ended up getting that opportunity to walk on. And then it gets even better. I've been, you still got to work for it. And that's the thing. Faith is an action word. That's one thing I've learned from this whole, the story's not over yet, but continued to keep working. And, I ended up having opportunities to, play a whole new position in football and go make impact with other people on the team through both Army and football. I've been able to bring leadership side of things I'm learning in Army that once I graduate, I'll become a second lieutenant and go be in charge of a platoon. But bring that over to football and help others become leader of men and stuff like that. And then same thing with football, the physicality side of thing, the team aspect to the Army. It kind of goes hand in hand. And I've really gotten to, with God being involved with it, I would have never foreseen me getting to be just simple as after games, getting to spend time with families, making their day, signing autographs, whatever it may be, getting to talk to them about the Word a little bit, about how great God is. Even just the last couple of weeks here in the summer, just getting to go do some things with certain youth group churches and also like youth football camps for Arkansas, and just get to go share that, that little bit of that testimony with those people. And so to wrap this all up with the testimony, I'm like, if it wasn't for God having a place in my life, I probably would have not gotten to have these opportunities, get to meet people like you, my teammates, my soldier buddies, my brothers in the Army, and then, just to provide something for my family to come enjoy as well. But yeah, God is great, and I'm so blessed to, have, had Him be a lead in my life.
That's incredible stuff. Now, you said wrap this all up, but I've got some questions because I heard some really cool stuff in there. And I'm just, I'm curious. And if I'm curious, I imagine there's some other folks that are curious too. My first question for you is, you kind of alluded to it a second ago, but you've got Army ROTC that requires a lot, and you've got being a Division I football player that requires a lot. And then you kind of mentioned there's some stuff that you can take from one to the other and back. What are some of the things that, compare and contrast the two for us? Like, what are some things that are uniquely different about these two? Other than the fact that one is military and one is a sport, right? But as far as the training, the planning, the discipline elements, like what is the same, what is the difference? Like what are things that cross over, and what are some unique things about those two that you've learned? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I would say from the way they are the same, the thing I love about it, and that's also another reason why I wanted to be in the military after I done playing football, is the team aspect, and how honestly the Bible verse, iron sharpens iron, as another man sharpens another man. Where you can both be competing and trying to go towards a certain goal, but you're both helping each other get there. That's where they're both very similar. So you're competing every day, and that's something that I think God wants us to do, to honor and glorify Him. You can do that through that process of things. And then a way that they're different, obviously, there's the Army side where, you're doing a different type of training. It's both very tough, so similar in that way.
So let's talk about that. Like what is I know there's a lot. You could go into so much detail, and we want to, keep in mind the time here. But I'm just curious. Give me one. What is a standard day of practice at the football stadium versus like a standard Army training day? Okay,
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So both similar times in waking up, but I would say Army is definitely way earlier.
Okay.
And then I could just take you through one of the days I've been through, and this is how you can tell it's different.
Let's hear it.
Last year I was doing both the trainings at the same time. And one of the days, I think the craziest days, was during the spring football practice. But I still had my Army requirements that I still had to meet. And in the morning, it was like 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm getting up, and we're getting ready to stretch at 5:00. And
for Army.
Yep, 5 o'clock. And literally going through that, we did a Army combat fitness test, which is very challenging for a lot of people. It's one of those things that you just you push through and find a way to do it. And so I did that in the morning, and this is with past couple days of having football practice too. In the morning, you're doing I'm talking like hex bar deadlift, your 2 mile run-in, sprint drag carry, which is like a 245s. You're pulling that backwards. A lot of weight lift movements, but you're going to try to drain the energy out of your muscle type of stuff. Went and did that. So if that gives you an idea of that sort of training, basically it's like, hey, we're going to try to keep going and going and going to where you're like mentally though, you're like, hey, I'm going to help my brothers out and they're going to help me and we're going to get through this and we're going to, go strive to be great and we're going to get this. But yeah, did that in the morning, went to the class. Right after that, had a football lift, which is more
at what time now are we getting to?
So basically, probably I think around that time was 8 or 9 o'clock.
Okay, so we had a 5 a.m. lift,
a quick little class at 6:30.
Yeah, 5 a.m. Army report, morning class.
Yep,
and then by 8 o'clock we're now at football training.
We had a workout. At that time.
Keep going.
Yep, had a workout for I think it was 8:30 was the time, either 8:30 or 9 o'clock. That was his last year. So, but yeah, basically went from that, and we had about an hour and a half run and team lift. So a lot more sprinting, a lot more running, cutting, quick burst of motion, more weightlifting, still very, very challenging stuff, but in a different way. And plus, already have done that lift, but it's great. I love that stuff. But then going from that, then you go back to maybe 1 or 2 more classes I think at the time. And then I go back to Army. And we had our normal training period. That's when we usually would go. We would call it either we'd have class, which is your instructional period, where you're learning how to do a certain thing, whether that be land nav, how to platoon attack, et cetera, et cetera. And then usually on Thursdays is how it works. You flip-flop Tuesdays and Thursdays. You would go out, which on that day we did have lab, and we went out and did stick lanes, which is, you have basically like an enemy out there, and you got to go take them out, whether it be recon or you're move the contact or react to contact, taking an ambush. But done with that, whipping the uniform off, putting the football uniform on.
Wow.
2:30 to 5, running football practice, and then a little bit of dinner, and then repeat.
And then you slept at some point in there,
somewhere in there, right?
And JB, and I know you, and I feel like even on a day like that, we're just listening to that. Many of us are probably like tired just from hearing that. Yeah. Like, okay, got it. So he had to report at 5, had to get up at 4. He worked out basically 4 times in one day, in addition to going to 3 different classes, all this stuff. You are the kind of guy also that says, even though I have all of this going on, which is already more than many of us even want to handle, you're finding time to get into God's word still.
That's right.
So what motivates you? Like, of all the stuff that's going on, like, how do you still find the time?
Yeah. I would say I think God's blessed me with the ability to kind of be a people person. I love being around people, and I think that's where I fit in both Army and football, and how I can relate with them and helping them be their best. The way I've found time is, obviously, this is where it was a blessing getting to meet you and other ministries as well, finding ways to put that throughout my day. And it's not always like, hey, you don't have to have a set schedule of when you do that. I think it's always good to be, talking to God throughout your day, whether that be, hey, like with us, we found a way to, hey, I have come into the Jones Center, I can eat my food, but we're also going to have a good hour-long discussion through Bible talk and get our word in for the day right then. Throughout my practices, I always try to say a prayer before we begin, and I'm like, hey, God, be a part of this day. I want you to enjoy this with me because you got me here. And then later in the day, usually I would go on Wednesdays, I'd go to church. I think there's a good college ministry for the college, for any college kid around here to go do that during the school year. Got a lot out of that, and if that didn't work that week, then I'd usually do Sundays in the morning. Still looking for that right fit for a church, but there's a lot of good options out here.
Yeah, but you're still seeking, and you're still knocking.
That's right.
And God's still opening doors.
That's right.
You mentioned it, but yeah, one of our favorite things to do, one of FCA's favorite things to do is let's do Bible study at the breakfast table. We all got to eat. We all got to eat. Might as well get God involved in the process. Okay, so. One more question for you. In Army ROTC, in football, what are some of maybe the ways or some of the challenges of acting and living out your faith in those two environments? And the reason I ask that is, sorry to interrupt my own question here, but the reason I ask that is that, in this kind of, both are very team element, both are very heavy unity. There's a big emphasis on unity.
Yeah, the brotherhood.
And the brotherhood of both of those things, and maybe
yes,
and I understand that despite the fact that we're in the Bible Belt, right? There are likely guys in both of those places that don't believe what you believe, and you have this commission that God has given us, right? The Great Commission is that we're supposed to go and make disciples of all nations, and we need to live out. We need to be a witness of Jesus in all the places that God has, all those doors that He's allowed you to walk through. So in Army ROTC, in football, where there's this big kind of emphasis on unity and brotherhood, and you're trying to maybe introduce something that might not be well received by some other. What are some of the challenges, and how have you lived that out? How has that practically looked, kind of as you've wanted to live out your faith in the places that God has put you?
Yeah. Ultimately, I always try to put into perspective, like, where my feet are, my faith is. And then the other thing is, like, I heard this from my parents. The best way I could put it is put your biblical bifocals on. So see it through God's eyes. So I want to always treat other people and help other people and see them how God sees them. So ultimately, like, again, if we're doing a workout, it's about how I go about that workout, because God wants us to be great. And like, I think a big thing I've learned from the Army is that I brought over the football, and I could vice versa. But ultimately, with Army bringing over the football is how can I bring somebody else along with me? So that's what I would say about that.
That's so good. Somebody once told me, they said, you don't have to know everything to teach somebody else. You just need to be about a half a step ahead of them.
That's right.
Right. So it's like I'm not dragging you. We're going together.
That's right.
And I think that's what I heard you saying, and I think that's so smart. And for somebody like me, this is my confession, that I let that cripple me for a long time. I would not want to be very vocal about my faith, because I'm like, well, what if they ask me a question that I don't know the answer to? Well, the answer to that is, well, good, let's go find the answer together. Hey, I don't know that. Let's go find out together, versus, cowering of just not knowing the answer at all. Man, that's so good. JB, as we kind of wrap up here, we have just a little tradition on the UARKFCA Timeout here. I'm just curious, with all of this that's been going on, what's God been teaching you lately?
Ultimately, actually, I brought my Bible.
Break it out.
Been going through Hebrews.
Okay.
And I think the way it was described to me, that we went over this last year in one of my the Wednesdays nights that we did church, but then I went home and actually they went over that same topic again, so I'm reviewing through it. They call it like the Hall of Fame of Faith.
Right.
And honestly, I'm just trying to find ways to continue, kind of like what we were just talking about right now, to continue to help others grow in their faith as well. And that's where I think, back with Army again, I mean, that's where I just love how it's a life of discipline, you know, and you can be the same way in your faith, whatever you do, whether it be your sport, if you're in band, you play an instrument, you know, having that discipline to be great. But yeah, I was saying, like, continue with your faith. I mean, that, you know, in the future, you don't always know what's coming at you. And then, like, I know I wrote down some notes, how, you know, faith is just, you know, words that can combat that fear of whatever that may be. And I think that it opens up right here in Hebrews 11. Faith is an action. Now, faith is the confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we don't see. So to answer your question, having that faith to continue to be great and help others, I think that's something I've been trying to strive for and trying to find ways to continue to do that.
You know, somebody once told me faith is almost like you could interchange that word with trust, right? Faith in God is trusting God.
That's
and
right.
I think that your story, as we just heard here, between battling those high school injuries, trying to figure out where to go to college, turning down maybe a good offer for an unknown situation.
That's right.
Man, it's all been, trust has been, I mean, it's been maybe even like the linchpin of your story.
That's right. That's kind of funny how we circle back to that too.
Yeah. And here you are, and God's still saying, okay, keep up with me, right?
That's
because
right.
it's an ongoing. It's not like I trusted God and now I'm done.
Yeah.
Right. It's an ongoing process. And practically speaking, JB, how, like, I feel like you already answered the question, and I guess we might be you know, kind of circling back to it here, but trusting God, how has that looked in your day to day? How could somebody watching, listening to this right now, if they said, well, I want to practice faith, or I want to practice trusting God, how could we do that?
So I think the biggest thing with God is, like, it's not just a, you know, it's a relationship. You know, that's where I was talking about. It's okay to constantly be talking with Him throughout your day. He wants to be a part of your day. You know, He's mentioned it multiple times in here in the Bible that He wants to be a part of your life, and He wants you to ask. Him ask you to be a part of your life. You know, you have to ask Him. He didn't force that upon you. So that's one thing. I just, you know, as a Christian, I'm like, when I first learned about Him, is that He wanted a relationship with me. He didn't force me to do that.
You know, I that reminds me that I've heard this my whole life. Well, God is everywhere. He's omnipresent. He's all powerful all the time. But one of the things that He also is He's love, and He loves you enough to respect your dignity and your freedom enough to not force Himself into your life, but to wait until you say, hey, God, I'm ready to have a relationship with you. And I think that we all have that same exact choice, right?
That's right.
And what I love about our faith, right, is that we have the opportunity to make that choice every single day.
Exactly. We
can wake up every day and say, all right, God, I can't do today without you. Let's work. JB, man, thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's been a joy getting to hear your story. I'm so glad that we got to have you come in here. I feel like I learned a little bit about. I mean, I thought I knew football a little bit, but I mean, I'm Army ROTC. I feel like I'm a little bit wiser. I don't know if I'm more in shape, but I feel like I'm tired. You know, I'm tired from, like, listening to how crazy your days are. Man, appreciate you being here. I mean, I don't know if I could ask for anybody better in the studio.
I appreciate it. It was just really great to be out here and to make this time to happen. And hopefully for those who were listening, they really ultimately got to learn a little bit more about what God can do in their life and how you can share that with others.
Thanks, brother.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to this episode of UARKFCA Timeout. If you enjoyed the story, learned something new, or both, consider subscribing and sharing this episode with a friend. You can follow us online at UARKFCA, and always remember to take the time out to recognize that you have a powerful story too.